I love coaching. Like, I think just as I was leading people, I realized that it's something that I truly loved. Like watching those moments for CEOs, realize that how they show up changes the culture, and then creating that change, like, that is powerful. My work is really like helping unlock other people. And like that is the thing that really brings me to life, is that. And so they've all been different versions of a similar story, I guess.
I'm Matt Tate, founder of Decimal and fellow entrepreneur. Yes, I'm one of the crazy ones. I've chosen time and time again to hustle my way through that first million. Now, I'm scaling to the next 50. So I know firsthand what the messy middle is really like. And I know that entrepreneurs and leaders like us need a destination for empowerment, community, and encouragement. This is our place. This is After the First Million. All right, welcome to After the First Million. I'm your host, Matt Tate, and I am excited today to be spending time with Adam Weber. Adam is a multiple-time founder, co-founder, founded some really awesome businesses. He's a podcaster, executive coach, and author. So bottom line, he's an expert at the messy middle, something that he actually calls the tween stage. So I'm really excited. Adam, welcome. Thank you so much for joining today.
Thanks, Matt. I'm excited to be here.
So before we get started, I like to ask everybody, I think, as you know, to run and start your own business, you've got to be a little bit crazy. So when did you know you were one of the crazy ones?
Oh man, that's a great question. It was about 13 years ago. This isn't something I knew I was going to do. Like, I didn't set out to be an entrepreneur. I actually thought I was going to do nonprofit work my whole career. Started out as a pastor. I was a musician for a while. Then I got into like nonprofit work, was working as an academic advisor, like genuinely entry-level job, bouncing around for 10 years. I had kids, kind of had a moment where I was like, I kind of want to like figure out how to provide for my family a little bit more. I was putting a lot of pressure on my wife, and I got a random sales job, and it was for a small business, like 10, 12 people. And kind of the first day I was like, I'm going to crack the code on this. Like, I'm going to take this one seriously, and just kind of set my mind to it. Really kind of initially started with like trying to master sales. And first year I had the best year that company had ever had, a small business, but still it was like significant to them. Second year doubled the revenue, and they were like, this is awesome. And I was like, I wonder how long I'm going to make money for somebody else. Like, I wonder if I should do this for myself. Total happenstance. How I got into entrepreneurship, though, is I wrote a blog with that sales job about my first $100,000 deal I closed. And this kid in college read it. Santiago's his name. And he sent me a cold message on Twitter. He was just like, hey, can I grab coffee? I'd love to learn sales from you. And, it's wild. That first coffee, I think we both just like knew that there was some natural connection between us. We were joking. He and I were actually on a podcast together yesterday, and we haven't worked together for almost 3-4 years, but it was like co-founders at first sight. Talk about being crazy. Imagine having 2 kids, having already had that 10-year start to your career, and now you got a 21-year-old in your family room who has one or 2 clients selling you and your wife on why you should join him, right? He walked out of the house that day and kind of pitching the business plan, and my wife was like, if you don't do this, you're going to regret it for the rest of your life, And so we just took a huge leap of faith when our boys were 3 and 4. That's basically how I got into entrepreneurship.
I really like that story for a couple of reasons that really resonate with me. Number one, I think so many times people think that to be a first-time entrepreneur, you have to be in the like de-risked phase of life. You have to not have kids. This is the time to do it. But you did it the other way around. To be fair, I did too. It wasn't until I had kids that I decided to be an idiot and start my first business. But I really like that because it's very different from the way people think. Although statistically, it's about equal. People start their first business at various phases in life. The other thing that I find is hilarious, my co-founder Jacob and I have worked together, and I'm now 40. And we first started working together after he spent a year at IU and dropped out. I also have a co-founder, a long time second business that we've worked together with, who is keeps me young. So I think that's really cool. So you and Santiago started a business. Tell us about that, because it actually became more than one business, didn't it?
It did, yeah. Our first business was called Bluebridge. It was a mobile app development company. I remember we built this business plan. Our first year, our goal was to have 32 customers. And at the time, think of it like Squarespace or Wix, like an easy way to build, but it was an easy way to build mobile apps. And it just grew fast. Like we went from those 2 customers to over 100 customers in our first year. And the team scaled really quickly. You know, we were up to probably close to 30, 25, 30 employees at the end of our first year. And that was also where I started to realize all my own kind of leadership gaps. And there's aspects of it that was like, I am thriving. Like finally I'm challenged. Finally I'm stretched. I'm not just passing time at work. I'm like recognizing some of my own abilities that I just hadn't really had to use before. And they all started to come out. And that part was a blast. Then the flip side was like, I was just a super clunky leader as a people leader, you know, and like how to like really motivate people or how to guide them. Because to get to that spot, I'd been so used to just like, I'll do everything, like I can figure this out. And then you have to go from that to leading people, you know, that sort of thing.
Most of the time, businesses have time in that startup phase. And that's also where you grow a little bit. But you guys basically accelerated through the startup phase into the like, we got to build a business into that messy middle pretty much overnight.
It sounds like overnight now that it's been years later. At the time, it felt like an eternity. You know, those first 6 months where I was cold calling by myself every day and like trying to figure out how to get customers. But it would have been like 3 or 4 months before I got my first yes. And I remember I would make 50 cold calls a day, every single day. I made my wife, because there's like nobody to hold me accountable at the beginning. I said, I need you. I want this so badly. Like, I don't want to go back to this entry level job world again. Like, I want this. And so I was like, every night at dinner in front of the kids, ask me how many calls I made. I can't guarantee this is going to work, but if it doesn't work, I don't want it to be because of my lack of effort. It was like that for a little while, but then once it got rolling, it really kind of took off pretty quickly.
You mentioned that you were a clunky leader. It was also your first kind of managing people job. You're also in that balancing of, I have to do things. It's my job to sell. It's my job to make money, but also manage. So you're in the and world of startups as well as, you know, at some point you looked and you had 30 employees and you're like, okay, we should probably have like HR processes. Payroll's a good thing. How did you kind of balance that? You mentioned clunky. Why? Unpack that a little bit.
I think the clunky part was a combination of 2 things. One was not having my own sure footing in who I was as a leader. And so then I would just like take advice from other people and try to apply it exactly, especially the sales side, which is where I started. That was one part of it, was kind of like trying to apply these like either tactics from a bad manager I'd had in the past or just some training that I didn't do what I call the work of translation and like make it my own and like do it in a way that is like my way instead of trying to just follow a textbook. And then the other is that I just wanted it so badly that at times the pressure and stress of it got to me and then sort of manifested itself toward my team. And I would say those were some of my moments where it's amazing that original team of 4 or 5 who I like dedicated my book to, they taught me how to lead, you know, and they're so great. I'm still great friends with all of them, but they all saw that other version of me as a leader and then helped me grow and become a leader to it. But, you know, there'd be moments where the one that stands out the most was like end of the day on a Friday, we did a stand up to kind of share our work for the week. I came in triggered before it started. I was like in a bad place. I was stressed about probably like the business's finances or whatever. And I wasn't impressed with how people did for the week. I'm sure they were probably all trying super hard, you know, but at the time it just didn't land with me. And I like lost it. And I stormed out of this meeting and we had concrete floors and I had to walk like 40 feet. So it echoed. It was like the most long form, embarrassing stomp out of a meeting ever. By the time I got to that door, it was so far away. I'm trying to storm out of this room. I was really embarrassed. And I also realized that something wasn't working with how I was like leading people. And so that weekend, I kind of had a bit of a heart to heart with myself and then came in that Monday and had a heart to heart with my team. And that I do think that was kind of the very start of me leading people in like a way that was more true to who I was and just kind of finding that balance of like, you're this person who sits with people and who's like makes people come alive and you're really gracious and friendly and funny and all that. And then for some reason inside of the confines of management, you're flipping into this other person. And so I kind of like just shared all that and said, hey, I want to be my regular self with all of you. and be the best leader I can, but also do it in a way that's me. I feel like they saw that like 50% of the time, and like they knew that that's who I was too. And in some ways, I think part of why it worked was they were all like, we're going to hold you to it. And I think they did, and that's why I think that's part of why I'm so close with so many of them to this day.
So that first year was kind of your figure it out, kind of rough. Tell us the Bluebridge story.
I don't think we knew we were exactly at the time, but we were kind of growing two separate companies at the exact same time because we had two markets. We were selling to cities who would buy the app. Like it was kind of like a Yelp, but the city paid for it, and it'd tell you where to eat, what was on the calendar of events, that sort of thing. And then we also sold to these like churches that had like a calendar of events, et cetera. It was the same product, but we had two markets and all that. And as we started to grow, the business started to get a lot more complex because how you sold to each of those markets was very different. So then we had to start splitting the branding, and then we had to start splitting the sales team, and then we had to start splitting the territories, and like everything as it started to grow. And they were each growing at like the exact same pace. I mean, almost identical. It created a little bit of complexity because we were kind of growing two separate companies at the same time with shared services, I guess, in the middle. So we did that for a couple years, and we had some pretty decent success with both. We had ambitions to grow a really big company. Like when we started, we really wanted to grow like a huge company. And we kind of ran into this issue with both of those two products. There's only 1,500 cities over X number of people, and there's only 800 churches over 1,000 or what, I can't remember the exact numbers, but basically like, and we'd already taken up 20% of the market in our first 18 months. And we're like, where to? And that was part of it is we picked, maybe a good lesson for us was like, we just picked too small of markets really originally.
So you were growing two companies. What was the end of the story for Bluebridge?
Yeah, well, it actually ties into Emplify. Because those two companies, we'd been like, well, we want to get bigger than these are going to allow us. So what's a third one we can start that will get bigger? And originally it was like, well, let's just take this exact same product and sell it to companies. And keep in mind, this is before Slack. Honestly, it wasn't even that good of an idea then. But now you're like, that's the worst idea. But it was basically like a custom branded mobile app for companies that held the company core values, where they could send push notifications to employees for like the most critical stuff, an employee directory, that sort of thing. We kind of built that as the third product. The wild thing is it did great. Those first two products got to $1 million in recurring revenue. It took 2.5 years, maybe roughly. That one, 18 months. Like it was fast. Like it happened like really quickly. And at the same time, I guess just to kind of close the Bluebridge chapter, we started to realize that that's kind of an endless market. It's a big market and big opportunity. Right. And now we're accidentally running three companies at the same time with a different logo and a different brand and all that. And so what we did then was we sold Bluebridge Tourism to one company, and we sold Bluebridge Churches to a separate company, both on the same day. Then we were kind of off to the races with Emplify.
Part of you, as focusing on Amplify, it had to feel good to sell the other two, just to be able to give you the chance to focus. But at the same time, like those are your first two babies. How did it feel to kind of go through that multiple acquisition phase? Or were you even able to actually experience it because you were still pushing hard at the third one, Amplify?
That's a great question, because I feel like my like acquisition letdown moment or like processing all took place with the Amplify acquisition more than the Bluebridge one. Because with Bluebridge it was interesting because it was like we sold them, and then the next day we kept all the employees. So we basically had this smaller startup, but we kept our employees. We could grow really quickly, and we were just more focused, And so, I mean, there was like a sense of accomplishment. It was one of those things where you're like, this is like a notch that we'll get to have and keep, and like know that we did something, something of value in the universe that like meant something to people. And so it was that, but it definitely also was like, we did it because there was a bigger opportunity in front of us, and it was like time to go. There wasn't a lot of recovery time. The next day, it was like no days off, no weekend. It was just kind of like, and we're back the next Monday.
Decimal is my third company. Every time I've turned the page on one company, it's given me the ability to actually stop, think, learn, apply. Were you able to do any of that? You mentioned initially with Bluebridge, you were a clunky manager. Did you have the ability to apply things and be different with Amplify, or was it really just an extension of Bluebridge? I like to focus on culture, and having a remote company is a different beast when you focus on culture. I always joke with friends of mine that are running growing companies with an office that you can lazily build a great culture when you have an office and are around everybody. When you're remote, you have to be much, much more intentional. But I can't imagine how much more that's true when you're running a culture company. You have to be that kind of glass house on the hill, don't you?
I think rightfully so. Like it was a bar that I liked to set. I liked that myself. Like I want to be a world class culture that, and I started sharing all the things we were doing like out openly. That was, on LinkedIn, I'd be like, here's a new thing we're working on. I just started to get into the world of like, I have to be super transparent. It's just the nature of what we're doing right now. And there are certainly moments that were really hard. If employees wanted to make a statement, it's like they just have a lot of power because it's like, hey, this is what we say to other companies. How are we not living this out ourselves? That sort of thing.
One of the things I've found in going through the phases of business, and I'm interested in your thoughts as you think of the beginning of Amplify. You mentioned each company, you were able to kind of speed it up a little bit at the beginning. What I've found in going through it multiple times is part of that's because as I've gotten deeper into that messy middle of having to actually build processes and efficiencies, it's helped me pull them forward quicker.
Yeah.
When my first time, it was just kind of go, do, learn, kind of clean up the road behind you a little bit. But is that kind of what you all learned and did a little bit with Amplify? Was able to pull some of that scaling, that ability to scale forward and apply it quicker to help you grow faster?
That's a perfect way to summarize it. It's like there's like a learning tax where you're kind of like learning how to do the thing yourself. And it takes you a long time to even like figure out what the answer is. There are things that I figured out on my own only to find out later is like this is like an industry standard best practice. I just spent 3 months trying to figure out how to crack the code on outbound cadences or whatever it may be. It could be anything, but we already have some systems in place that are just working, and so let's just like change the language and then put the new system in place, that sort of thing.
The Amplified journey doesn't end after that first year. Tell us a little bit more about that journey in that company.
As I mentioned, it kind of started as that mobile app. We wanted to get into this employee engagement market, which was really a growing market at the time. And simultaneously, we're realizing like, wow, we all really are good fits for this market, like this topic. Like we have a great culture. We're really passionate about engagement. One caveat is that our product actually doesn't help the industry we're trying to break into. And so we were like, what if we actually could meaningfully make a difference to create better cultures for people, like highly engaged cultures? And so while we were selling that mobile app, we kind of had a little tiger team spin off, like kind of demystify what engagement was, did a lot of research, built our own survey. And then originally it was just like this survey on SurveyMonkey that somebody like would read the results to. And we kind of demystified what it meant to create a highly engaged culture, what made people motivated. And then we'd meet with the CEO and just talk them through it. That was the moment we were just like, this is actually how you build great high performance cultures. And so from the get go, our very first idea been the one that was our last idea, we would have had a very different outcome, right? That's not how it worked for us. We started, we stopped, we started, we stopped. At that point, we realized we were really onto something that lived out the promise that we were after, which was like to help improve employee engagement. And so we turned that into a product, right? An easy way for employees to give feedback, a dashboard that people could like actually understand their culture, and then this kind of real-time coaching for executives to tell them with data what's going on inside their culture. So basically sunsetted the mobile app, moved everybody over to the measurement tool, and then the measurement tool is the thing we did the very longest. We did this employee engagement measurement concept for probably 3.5, 4 years before the exit.
Let's fast forward to the exit. So you built the company for 3 or 4 or 5 years. It's growing. What made you guys kind of reach a point where it was like, all right, time to be done?
So 3 or 4 years, that measurement part, but everything I just shared total, just to give everybody some anchor on time, that was 10 years, maybe 9.5. So
wow.
From that Bluebridge conversation to that, right? So it's just a lot of start, stop. But same, Santi and I did the whole thing together. 2 things happened. One, COVID happened. And when COVID hit, the kind of employee engagement measurement space started to get gobbled up by hub solutions. So we were in a really tricky spot. Like basically we had to decide, were we going to create a kind of industry specific niche product, which we haven't been so far, or are we going to exit? Did we have the energy to keep doing this? And I think we ran out of gas, and we kind of had this perfect scenario that played out for us, which is just so grateful for, that one of our customers who used our product forever and like loved our product, a couple years before they'd called us and been like, hey, would you ever consider joining us? And we're like, we threw out a ridiculous number, and they're like, nope. And it was so cool. Imagine a CEO calling you to ask that and then saying, I just want to be straightforward with you. We're going to build a competitive product. So we had a ton of respect for them all along. They went and tried and realized how hard it was to build this product. It was really hard, right? And then they came back to us.
Right.
We'd been using their product. They used ours. We always kind of considered ourselves brother and sister companies. And so it really worked out. It was just really fortuitous, I guess. Like our energy was fading. Our path to like victory wasn't super clear. And then this kind of soft landing for us came, and we jumped at it.
You just mentioned that a big piece of what Emplify became involved kind of executive and CEO coaching. You kind of started your career in the nonprofit world. You then went into sales. But ultimately, did you kind of find your personal fit in executive coaching? Is that what led to where you are today? Or was that just kind of a seed that was planted that took some time to grow?
It's somewhere between, I've been quietly building toward this, not realizing it my whole career, and something that like it's happened. Like I think just as I was leading people, I realized that it's something that I truly loved, and part of Emplify, like watching those moments for CEOs, realize that how they show up changes the culture, and then creating that change, like that is powerful. I also think in my own personal life, I love helping people become the best version of themselves. See what they're great at, find that thing that maybe they don't even see in themselves, and then help them like bring it to life, like practically, not just all like kind of up in the clouds, like actually how can you do this? And so it's been some combination of that. And that was what was so beautiful about, I guess, the end of Emplify, and then even the 15.5 acquisition was like the last 2 years of Emplify, I had this moment. I went on a founder retreat. It sounds as foundery as you can imagine. It was out in the middle of the woods. And I kind of realized, though, out there, I was like, my work is really like helping unlock other people. And like that is the thing that really brings me to life, is that. And so they've all been different versions of a similar story, I guess.
It's interesting for me because I empathize a lot with what you're talking about. One of the joys I find in my role as CEO is unlocking my team and being able to help them grow towards and even exceed their ceiling. And one of the things that really unlocked it for me, and you've seen this during the time, those of us that led through the pandemic, that's in some ways a trauma that we're going to spend decades unwinding from. But one of the things that it really unlocked for me, and I think for a lot of people, particularly those of us like kids of the 80s, particularly men, I wouldn't say that like vulnerability and emotions were something that I grew up thinking about or doing very much at all. But in the pandemic, there was something that just got that veil removed, and it was that CEO, that who you show up as doesn't always have to be happy, but authentic. And if you're feeling bad, if you're having a rough day, if you're struggling with something, it's okay to talk about that. It's okay to be who you are. You have to be careful on how you deal with that outwardly and how you're transparent, but you can still be transparent versus you don't have to hide from that. Is that something that you kind of found in either your personal leadership or in your coaching as well?
Yeah. So in my book, there's a whole chapter on this concept of centeredness, right? The whole concept of the book is like, how do you lead as your authentic self, but in a way that drives performance for the team? Executives live in this tension of like, I want to build a great culture. This isn't a nonprofit. We need the
We got
company
to
to
win.
perform. It's yeah, we got to win. And so we live in that duality, and like part of that stomping out of the room moment, right? That I was shared earlier. It's like I realized like what are the disciplines, what are the habits, what are the changes I need to make in my life that allows me to show up in a calm, steady, consistent way. Because I do think authenticity is really important, but I also don't think just showing up however you want to show up is super valuable. Like having agency over how you show up to your team is a learned skill as well. So if you're heightened and super stressed and all that, and then your employee talks to you and it's like natural for you to lash out at them, that doesn't mean it's the best thing for the team, right? Like what creates psychological safety in like a great team is someone who has an emotional regulator who can be real but who also can be consistent. And so, yeah, I'm in the middle of starting my own thing again right now, like from scratch. As this is coming out, like I'm still in the early, this is my first full week kind of expanding my executive coaching practice, right? And like, it's interesting, like I've done all that stuff in the past, and yet still, I woke up this morning just like feeling that anxiety of like, what if nobody believes in this? It's all the same stuff that I was telling myself 10 years ago, right? So I go back to those same disciplines. And I know everybody's different, so I don't want to speak for everybody, but it's like I journal, I sit down in the morning, I try to write out like how I'm feeling. I try to read something timelessly true that kind of roots me in a moment that's bigger than like this one moment to remind me like you've done this before, like you were meant to do this work, those type of things. And then I go on a walk. It's nothing overly complicated, but it's amazing that like it's a discipline. I put that in place because what you're doing right now is not easy. You're carrying a constant weight. It's hard work. And so those disciplines for me at least have been super helpful.
I'm a big proponent that if you are the leader or CEO of a growing or big company, I think you need three things to be successful. Number one is focus on your own personal and mental health. And that looks different. For you, it's the journaling, it's the reading something that's timeless, it's the walk. For me, it's a workout, it's meditation, it's some other things. But having whatever your own personal and mental health, having that locked in, also understanding that as time goes on, things will change and being willing to adapt. Number two is finding a peer group, some group of people where you can learn and talk and be free to do it. Because as your team grows, your ability to have some of those conversations about your own inadequacies, about your own anxieties, about even some of your joys, you stop being able to do that entirely, even with your co founder. And then the third is a paid coach, somebody that you actually pay to talk to and give advice. And I have one, you are one. But I think that that encapsulates to me all the things you need to be successful as a CEO.
Yeah, and when you said that on the first call, I was like, that's like really, really good. Like I really think that you nailed it. On that peer group, it's really easy to think that the stressors you're facing are unique to you. And there's something that happens with the peer group
Right.
that normalizes the challenges. And as soon as you normalize the challenge, it sort of deflates the stress balloon a little bit. I'm not the only person in the world who's dealt with this, or sometimes that learning tax that you're paying as you're growing, like the person's like, hey, I just did that. Here, let me just share it with you. Part of why I knew that I wanted to be a coach was because of the impact that coaching had on me. There's this component of like having a person who will tell you the truth, having a person who will kind of be real with you about how you might be showing up, or where you can explore these aspects of yourself. Like leadership, the part that doesn't get talked about enough is how like it basically brings up all your childhood trauma, like all the stuff you hid away. Like there's a reason why you got into entrepreneurship, and it was to basically block yourself from whatever you were scared of as a kid, and it's always there under the surface, and it's valuable to explore, to like actually grow, and it makes you a better person, which is what's so cool. I feel like I'm a much better person because of how I got pushed through the growth and stress of entrepreneurship, but then also through coaching. And the other one, though, for like a CEO, is that it's amazing what happens when you give a CEO an hour for themselves. Like that's why I love coaching, because I've been on the other side. I've been taking in all these inputs. You have to make these decisions. You start to spin and swirl a little bit. You almost can get paralyzed on what's next. For me, it's like I meet an hour every other week with my clients, and it's like it's borderline sacred what happens when you just let a CEO talk or an executive talk and just like listen and then summarize back. And of course, there's other moments where there's challenging or collaborating, but like sometimes you just need space to explore.
Well, and I think a big part is when you're constantly fighting through a problem, you don't have the ability to rise above the problem and look at it from a different perspective. And the peer groups, the coaches, they give you the ability to just kind of rise above it and look at the problem from a different perspective. And that I think is such a key thing in being a CEO. And if you start a business, you're the type of person that always sees the light at the end of the tunnel. You think, I will do it, I can do it. But sometimes that light feels very small and very far away. And what I like to tell people is coaching and peer groups, those are the types of things that can make the light bigger, bring it closer
Right.
to you in ways that you couldn't or would do slower yourself.
You're the host here, but I am curious though, because you've done coaching like for yourself. Like, how do you think you've grown the most yourself since you've done coaching?
I had a coach, and my coach has been doing it since 1980. Since before I was born, he has been coaching people that are way cooler than me. And I really like that he has a database program that we started with a full 360-degree analysis of me from my own perspective and people that had been in my career dating back 10 years. I mean, people were amazing. They went through a 45-minute test and analysis about me. And what that did was that helped him understand what some of my flaws were that I wasn't seeing. Also, some of the things that I was really good at that I struggled to recognize. Having Rich, my coach, having that type of center point to help understand my flaws. There's one good example. I had a coaching session yesterday, and we were talking about how personally, on my one-on-one, I am very much the opposite of a conflict avoider. If you and I have a problem, I am going to sit there. I'm going to talk to you about it. We're going to figure it out. We're going to move on. But when it comes to other people and other people's conflicts, I am a conflict avoider. If two people on my team are having an issue, I had a tendency to say, go figure it out. Well, go figure it out is code for I'm avoiding this conflict and don't want to deal with it. Go do it. And realistically, people on your team don't do it. And so you've just avoided everybody's conflict rather than stepping back, creating a safe space, giving them a chance to solve the conflict themselves, but then also being willing to create that safe place to solve it. And that was something that was just mind blowing for me, because to think that I am was just kind of earth shattering for me. And then it made me seriously sit down and rethink who I was. And I think some parts of being a good leader, it's not just being transparent with other people, but it's being transparent with yourself. See you are, what your flaws are, what your good parts are, and recognize and be willing to talk about all of them. And that's what I found Rich has been very helpful in, is that he's been coaching me for over 2 years. And so it is a well-worn shoe at this point.
What a great example too of like how you've kind of identified these aspects of yourself and then shown up too. That's awesome.
Let me flip it onto you. You now coach and have been coaching people for a while. What are some of the things and some of the stories that you've learned in not just your dealing with the messy middle, but coaching people in that messy middle?
What's interesting is how many have like naturally come up, you know, like with what we've just shared today. Like there's one that I think I see time and time again, which is like a lot of people who start businesses are starting it because they have this dream of the future of what their life will be like when it's over. And how many of those things you can actually pull forward right now and start living the life that you want to live. So I would say that's one, is like, what are you delaying? Like, what is that thing that you're working for down the road? And how can you begin to live that life today? I think that comes up a lot. You know, it's interesting. Like you said, you're like not a conflict avoider. There are a lot of conflict avoiders. Maybe there's a known conflict, but it's like the second biggest conflict. And so it's kind of like, that one's for later. And so, you know, there's kind of like the two ends of the spectrum. There's the people who lean in too much to conflict and it like stifles progress. And then there's the people who are avoiding conflict and it's like just a problem that needs to be, you know, something that needs to be said today.
Oh, yeah.
I do think the very most common thing is when a problem feels so big, it makes your world feel small. Like you can't see outside of that problem. The stress supersedes your judgment. That is like something that is very common for someone that's just leading. It's not unique to someone in coaching. It's unique to human beings who are trying to lead companies. One other one I was just thinking about before this call is that I think oftentimes CEOs and leaders of companies forget when they're making a big decision that they've had like months to ruminate on the decision. And then they enact it and then immediately are frustrated that everybody else isn't like just jumping out of their seat super excited about it, even though they had no time to ruminate. And like that's really common where it's like, I'm really frustrated at my team because this thing that's obviously the right decision, and it probably is. It's just that how do you actually get people on board with your vision, with this thing that you've really thought about? And how do you give them space to process too?
You know, it's funny. You bring up two things I've been talking a lot about: socializing decisions before you make them. We're getting ready to go through some changes at Decimal, and luckily by the time this podcast comes out, we'll be deep in them. So this won't shock anybody. But I talked to the team and I talked to the managers that are going through, and I say, I want you to go have one-on-ones about people, with people about this topic. And I want you to spitball it, give some ideas, socialize it. I've already done that with my direct reports, with the people even below them, but socializing a decision and getting people's input before it becomes final, before that presentation. It was something I talked to our director of ops, Nicole, about. I said, look, big presentations are really a terrible place for people to hear about things the first time. You should go into any room and put yourself in a position where everybody has heard about this beforehand and give them the space to then process it together, because they've also had the space to process it separately. The other thing that I think is really important, that in a growing organization, and this is my big kind of Q2, Q3 theme right now, is creating space. And I think space is such an important thing in that messy middle that you can struggle with, where you have to create space for you to relax. You have to be able to take time off. I, for the first time in embarrassingly long, turned off my phone during spring break for 2 days, creating mental space for me to just detox. But the other thing is creating space for people to do things. When you grow an organization so fast, people are so busy, and you assume that they can continue to do their jobs while also institute change. And if they don't have the space to do it, it's never going to happen. And you have to just think of space as a moving part of any organization.
I think that's so good. It's interesting, like this, how do you rise above, right? Like, how do you kind of get that higher order thinking? This is why I go on walks. It's the same thing. I don't bring my phone on walks with me. And I know it's not 2 days, but it's like 30-minute walk with no access to technology. Like somehow in the middle of it, this problem that I've been ruminating on forever just disappears. It's like, oh, okay, I see it differently, you know? Or, you know, you can just simply being overstressed can make simple things feel hard as well. But that's great. And I also want to go back to your comment on like a big company meeting is like the worst place to learn something new. I love that so much because human beings are just averse to change, period, right? It's like it's hard. And your natural reaction is to resist. And so it's like, I'm always like, nope, I'm just going to trickle stuff out, float it out, get some advocates. I had a couple people that were like, people that have naturally adverse reactions or who are really critical, instead of viewing that as a negative, I go, they definitely are going to see something that I'm not seeing right now. And so I want to go to them first. And I want to get their feedback about what's wrong about what I'm about to share with the
They will
company.
probably improve what you're going to do.
Right. They do improve it. And then when I roll it out too, I also reference them, knowing that everybody already knows these are some of the biggest so now that person's on board, and it makes the whole thing so much smoother. One other thing I was just thinking about too, just like came to me with what we were talking about, like the reality of like growing a business, especially if you have a family, like you and I are both dads in the middle of like raising kids and everything too, is that it does take discipline. Physically being present at home versus mentally being present at home is like a really important aspect too. That's like worth a conversation, you know. I remember when I allowed myself to get overstressed, yes, I'd be at dinner with my kids or I'd be at the soccer game, but was I there? And I do think when I'm really there, it's like what I want my life to be, you know, but it can take some discipline with when you're in those really either heightened stress times and also honestly the really exciting times too.
I really appreciate you coming on. I have one last question. This is going to be a great tag for your coaching business. As you think about all the coaching you've done, as you think about your experiences, if you could give one piece of advice to CEOs and leaders going through this messy middle, what would it be?
I think like what used to be organic and what used to happen really naturally for you, it's okay to take the goodness of that and put some scalable processes around it as well. But just because you're adding those processes doesn't mean you're like losing that goodness of like what you'd originally created. You're simply allowing that vision to really come to life. I think that's like tactically what I'd say to somebody who's in the messy middle, like as far as like for their company. I think for themselves, whether it's a walk, whether it's 2 days, whatever it may be, don't delay the life that you want in your personal life. There's nothing that is worth sacrificing your very being with, because once the business ends, you are still with yourself. And so just make sure you're like good to yourself as you're on this journey too.
Oh, I love it. Well, Adam, this has been an awesome conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. That was great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks so much for listening. After the First Million is presented by Decimal. To listen to more episodes and find tips to help make running a business easier, visit decimal.com/AFM. Want to join the conversation? Reach out to me on LinkedIn and let's explore the messy middle.